What is up, guys? This is Pedalboard build part 2. If you didn't see part 1, I will link that above in this video so you can go back and watch that. You'll see kind of the mistakes I made with my previous pedal board when I threw it together and how I fixed it in my new pedal board. I'll show you the new pedal board here in a minute. We'll kind of go through some tones. First, I want to go through kind of some best practices. But before we get to any of that, I need you to do a couple of things for me. One, if you like this kind of content, please subscribe and hit the bell icon. That way, YouTube will be kind enough to send you a notification when I post new videos and when new stuff goes live. Also, if you are interested in any of the stuff in this video, I will have it linked in the description as Amazon affiliate links. They don't charge you anymore. They charge you the same low prices that they always do, but it really helps out my channel if you purchase through those links. So if it's something you're going to buy anyway, please consider doing that. Also, if you like this video, comment below or other stuff you would like to see. And if you like this video, of course, hit that thumbs up and make it turn blue for me. The YouTube algorithm and I both really appreciate it. So without further ado, let's jump into the video. Alright, so I just want to take you through a few things that I always use and a couple of best practices when building your pedal board. So the first thing that I always keep around is Deoxit D5. Now essentially, according to the front of the can, this removes oxidation, improves connections, seals, and protects surfaces. So essentially, a practical way to think of using something like this is when you have a bad connection. Now, this is not for a soldered connection necessarily, but if your guitar has a pot that when you roll it up starts to crackle from a lot of use, or same thing with guitar pedals, or you have a jack that is sometimes kind of intermittent, sometimes spraying Deoxit is a quick fix. There's a bunch of different types. I've always used the D5. The D5 is great. It's not the cheapest thing in the world. I think it's typically about 15 to 19 bucks a can, but it lasts forever because you're not using it a ton. Even if you're regularly maintaining your board, you still will probably have a can last you for a year or so. One way that I always use this in particular is if I'm playing outside gigs, especially in the southern heats. It's really helpful for me to just have that on hand, and I always spray it kind of after gigs just to prevent any kind of oxidation buildup that would happen from moisture on metal connections, especially since not all metal connections in either your guitar or your pedal board are all stainless steel. There's copper, there's brass, there's other things that will oxidize more easily. Another thing that I always use for pedal board builds is dual lock. Now, some people tend to use two different densities of dual lock, they'll say. So if you can see here on this one, the teeth are kind of close together, but in some of them, the teeth are a little bit bigger and further apart. And so if you use two different densities, they will lock really well together. And I actually think sometimes that they lock together too well. And that's just because I tend to swap out pedals, or maybe I have, as in on my last pedal board build that you'll have seen in the last video, I have one section of my board that I intentionally designed to be modular. So if I swap out pedals, that's where they're swapping out. Because of that, the regular dual lock on both sides, so both on the pedal board and on the pedal, works great for me. It still holds everything down super tight, and you have to take it on and off a lot to wear it out. And if you wear it out, you can always just buy more. I love the regular dual lock. I typically buy like the 20-foot sections. I think it's about 30 bucks, but it lasts a long time. I redid this whole pedal board, and I only used maybe half of one of the rolls, and this roll, as you can see, has not even been opened or used yet. So you still have plenty for future builds or to help out friends of yours if they ever need any dual lock. The next thing is the cables. So I build my own patch cables. If you haven't ever done that, there's some great videos up on how to do that. Mesa Marangella, the Rig Doctor at Vertex Effects actually has some great soldering videos. So I'm not going to post any of that here, but you can go and find those yourself. I use Mogami cable, and I use either pancake ends like on these cables, or I will use the square plugs. I use both the SP400, which is for the Mogami 2314, so as you can see, the skinnier of the two cables, and I also use the straight barrel plugs for some connections. On the junction box that I built for my board, kind of the in and out hub, these helped save space, and they're really great short barrel connections, especially if you have some kind of a switcher that needs straight ends as opposed to pancake ends. So the 2314 is the smaller, skinnier cable. I haven't noticed any kind of tonal difference between that and the 2319. The 2319 has kind of been the standard for patch cables that a lot of people use. Typically, if I'm using pancake ends, I'll use the 2319. More recently, I've also gone to the SP400 ends in both the straight and the angled with the 2314. So both are great options. You can look them up, see what works best for you. The good thing is the 2314 is a little bit cheaper than the 2319, but both are so cheap that if you're building your own cables, it's pretty inconsequential. And the last thing on this list is cable management. So to kind of keep everything organized, I use what you'll have probably seen a lot of, and that is these little tiny adhesive backed, I guess you could call them zip tie mounts. I've always called them zip tie mounts. So basically you can see here they've got holes on all four sides and adhesive on the back, and essentially that allows you to easily take a zip tie. By the way, zip ties, the smaller the better for this kind of stuff, because generally you're not using huge cable runs. I buy the 4-inch ones if that helps. You can run zip ties through these to manage your cables. As you can see, if I had this locked in, I would be able to hold quite a good bit of cable, especially considering that these are just patch cables. I'm not trying to run any major AC power cables or anything like that under this, or standard size stuff. So if you're using the Mogami 2314 or 2319, you can get plenty of cables under there. I use those to manage both power and signal cables. Contrary to what some pedal board builders may have you think, running power and running signal cables together is not a negative thing. They get the idea from when you're doing stage layouts or when you're designing professional stages or sound stages for concerts and arenas and that kind of stuff. You don't want to have your signal cable running parallel with your power cables, because you're running both a lot of signal and a lot of power. On a small pedal board build, you're not going to notice any noise or any difference with those kind of things. So those are the things that I like to use. A few best practices for those is to prep the surface before you attach anything. So when you're building your pedal board, if you're using an old pedal board or even a new one, it's good to just get some kind of alcohol swab or something to wipe it down. You don't have to do anything fancy. You just want to make sure there's not a lot of dirt and grime from leftover builds. Like for myself, this is probably the 4th iteration I've had on this same flatboard. So I prepped the surface with alcohol swabs before I started building it. Yeah, I think that's it. That's pretty much everything that I use on my pedal board builds. I keep it pretty simple. Materials cost hardly nothing. I used a lot of leftover patch cables that I have built before. I kind of have a stock of a bunch of extra ones. Even when my board builds out, I probably have another dozen sitting around of various lengths. But those are some of the things that I use. I'll also have linked in the description the soldering iron that I like to use and a couple of different price points and options for that. Again, if you haven't seen any soldering videos, I highly recommend you look them up and learn how to do it. Soldered cables are just a lot more reliable than solderless, especially if you are changing your pedal board setup at all, even if it's just a couple of pedals, or if you are traveling with it regularly. If it's sitting in your bedroom and not going anywhere, solderless might be fine for you, but I personally, over the past years, have gone to exclusively soldered cables because I had some bad run-ins with solderless a few years ago before I made the switch. So those are kind of my best practices. Now let's jump into the tones. couple of other things that you should probably have around if you are considering building your own cables. Of course, you need a soldering iron, you need solder, you need the cable parts, as I previously mentioned, but a couple things you might also want to have around. I have one of these non-insulated wire cutter stripper combinations. These are super helpful to have around when you're doing this kind of work. It allows you to, without messing up the cable, kind of cut the appropriate size and then just generally cut off ends and that kind of thing. That's super helpful. They're not expensive. You can pick them up at Walmart and hardware stores and all of that for probably under $10 for the most part. I'll also link some from Amazon below. And another thing is a cable tester. Now this is an old one. This is super helpful when you're testing even different types of cables. You can do XLR, MIDI, 1/8 inch, 1/4 inch, multi-jack, all kinds of stuff on this one. And again, not super expensive. This beats the hassle of having to go and then plug your cable in and test it with one you know is good and make sure the signal is the same and the sound is the same. This will give you green light if it's good. It'll give you red and yellow lights if it's bad. So super helpful to have around. Highly recommend investing in both of those things. It will save you a lot of time and a lot of headache for very minimal investment. Alright, so this is going to be a pretty general overview of the board, kind of how I use some of the effects. Again, this isn't going to be comprehensive for all the sounds that I use, but I just want to give you an idea of what I use, how I use it, and that kind of thing. So I'm going into my Sir Badger 18. I'm playing through my Sir Classic S. It's an HSS configuration. I did a demo of it on this channel, which I will link above. And if you haven't seen the previous pedalboard build, then make sure you look in the description and find that, and then all of this will make a lot more sense. So without further ado, this is my clean tone on the neck pickup. As you can see, no pedals engaged. And I'll let you hear the humbucker just so you can hear that as well. Alright, so I'm back to the neck pickup. Clean tone sounds like this. Now I run this compressor at 18 volts. It's my favorite compressor I've used, and I've used quite a few, and it sounds like this. I'm using it to boost the amp, push it a little bit harder, particularly when I need to use it at lower volumes. As you can hear, there's also a lot of note definition. And I have a lot of dynamic range. Moving on, kind of sticking with clean tones, sometimes I will use a filter subtly like this. Sometimes I use it for kind of funky auto wah sort of stuff. So kind of clean-ish. I use the iron drive kind of in a couple of ways. So here it is, clean, iron drive. Sounds really good. I use my compressor again to push the amp harder, but it also will push the overdrives harder since it's run first in the chain. And it sounds like this with the iron drive on. Bridge pickup. That's kind of my main go-to dirty sound. I also use the kilt, and this will be without the fuzz mode first, just kind of with some more character. This gets pretty dirty. And that's kind of the dirtiest overdrive sort of tone that I will use. I'll also use the kilt for fuzz. And I'll use that with more extreme delay and reverbs to kind of get that really big ambient post-rock, this will destroy you kind of stuff when I need to. So a lot going on there, as you can hear. Kind of the mainstay on the board, the pedal that's been on this board for the longest is the Strymon El Capistem. Been with me about 6 years now, sounds like this. As you can hear, that's with the favorite engaged. I have it set to a dual tape head delay with a little bit of spring reverb as well for kind of a really wet sound. And for dry, I keep it on a dotted eighth or a quarter. In this case, it's a dotted eighth. We all know how that sounds. I use it with a little bit darker tape delay. Since it's in the loop, it's a little more pristine and you can really hear the effect of it. Another crazy thing on this board is the conga. So I already showed you the filter side. This is just the fuzz side. Get ready. This one's pretty nasty. So clean. Conga with the fuzz. Whew, yeah, so that one will take your head off. You have to be real careful with it, especially if you're not running it into the filter. Going into the filters like this. So much more usable, but if I'm wanting just the fuzz and not the filter effect, I will run it into an overdrive, which is part of the reason that it's before these overdrives, also to get more sensitivity out of it as well. But it sounds something like this going into the iron drive, a little less aggressive top end, more usable in general. Without the iron drive. So as you can hear, again, it's a lot more usable with without some of that top end. All right, moving on. Pitchfork, kind of currently have it set up as a POG sort of thing, so adding some octaves. So let's kick that off. Go back to clean tone compressor. Sometimes I'll use it in the non-latching mode for kind of some immediate stabs, for some more dramatic effects. Kind of getting some of those whammy Tom Morello style effects. The Julia I currently have set up is kind of a Leslie kind of vibrato. Sometimes I'll use it as a true chorus. This is the one that kind of changes the most depending on the setting. But to be able to get kind of a wide variety of tones, I'll typically use this in kind of a vibrato type setting more than chorus. Clean. With the Julia. Also has some great chorus tones, but I'm not going to go too much into that. That's been one of my favorite new pedals. Recently got that from Walrus, and it is excellent. Now I have the Ages run last in the dry chain, and the reason is to kind of sculpt the sound. So if I'm using a backline amp, which frankly isn't really the case in 2020, but if I'm using a backline amp for anything, I'll kind of use that as a last in the chain, kind of shape my tone. Or in this case, I sometimes like to use a chorus effect to fatten up my dirty tone. So if I'm running my amp kind of dirty, like I did in a recent video on my Instagram. So if you haven't seen that, that is linked down in the description. Follow me there. You'll see more of those kind of short guitar clips and also just what else is going on in my life outside of YouTube. So if I have the Julia set as more of a chorus, I'm going to slow down the rate, bring the lag down. Let's see what this sounds like. Pretty subtle effect, and if I'm really pushing the amp, or in this case running the Ages Dirty after it, then it just kind of thickens up the tone, and it's not so much about the chorus effect. So it sounds like this with the bridge pickup on my Sur. So it's pretty subtle, but sounds really good. The Eventide's doing a lot of heavy lifting. I'm going to do a more in-depth video, I think, on some of my favorite kind of out there studio tones. If you're interested in that, leave a comment below. But that sounds like this with just kind of your standard reverb. Everything else off except the compressor clean. Tend to use a lower mix and higher decay on my compressor. Sorry, on my reverb, not on my compressor. And the heavier reverbs, of course. Yeah, so a lot there. I also have some different golden ratio delays and some different octave and pitch effects as well. That one kind of is a catch-all for most of my tones, but generally speaking, in normal settings, I'm using it primarily as a reverb. So that's kind of an overview of the board. I hope this video has been helpful for you. If it has, please give it a like and comment down below some of the stuff that you want to see. And if you want to see that sort of studio tones breakdown using crazy effects in the context of a song, please let me know and leave that in the comments. And if you like this kind of video, subscribe. So that's going to be it for this one, and I'll see you guys in the next one.